When we polarize, they win. It's a paradox. Who's the they when I'm talking about the we and polarization? And what does it mean for us to come together and rise through that construct? And how do we deal with the fact that half of the country is in devastation and grief and really pissed at the people who didn't protect their rights, while at the same time, the other half of the country is really excited about the future to come? How do we come together through all of that? Who is the enemy? What do we do with this idea that we need to have an enemy? Do we need to have an enemy? How do we use this moment as a catalyst for the next stage of our evolution and rise together? This conversation that I'm having with Christopher Life, founder of the United Independent Movement and United Independence, is going to help you understand what are the next steps that you can take no matter where you are in the polarization conversation. Upset? Happy? Afraid? Relieved? But not so sure? You don't know what to feel? Make sense with us. Listen in. I look forward to your comments, your confusion, your uncertainty, your certainty, your clarity, your knowing, all of it. Do it right here in the comments so that we can come together and create a new future reality. I'll see you on the other side. So the last time we were here together, it was right before the Independent National Convention. And since then, a lot has happened, including an election where we now know the outcome. I want to welcome you back today so that we can make sense together. So thanks so much for being here with me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So there's no question now about what happened, because we know that Trump was elected, and I'm curious what you see as the ramifications of that for the independent movement and for our next steps collectively.
Well, so the growing U.S. independent movement, from my vantage point, is where we're going to see really profound systemic transformation in our political environment over the next 10 to 20 years in this country. And RFK being a prominent figure of that movement and building the attention, bringing hundreds of thousands of organizers and volunteers together, set a trajectory and built a lot of momentum for the movement. Him stopping his campaign and getting behind Trump was a very interesting moment in time for the U.S. independent movement and for his followers and supporters. And I think there are a lot of questions were raised on, is that a good decision? Did he abandon the independent movement? Did he abandon his fierce commitment to systemic transformation? Is he going to get chewed up and spit out by Trump? And I think that for those of us who are really enthusiastic about RFK, if it's true that he didn't have a chance to win, and if it's true that he would have major influence in the administration, and if it was true that Trump was going to win, then that seems like a pretty rational choice to be made. Before the election, we didn't know if any of those things would be true. Would Trump just use them temporarily to get votes? Would Trump lose and now RFK lost all of his political credibility because he spent it all in that choice? So it was very risky, and that's the choice that RFK made. And I start there in answering your question because that was kind of, we're grafting in from the past of the independent movement into this current moment. With RFK going behind Trump, and I don't have the ability to know the degree to which that influenced the election outcome, but it certainly didn't hurt, because there's a lot of people that I know that would not plan on voting for Trump that were behind RFK that voted for Trump because of that choice. So some percentage of the electorate was swayed by that choice, and for a number of reasons, Trump won. From my vantage point, I'm seeing a lot of the energy that was in the independent space move into that administration. So whether you're a fan of Trump or not, which we can have that conversation, there is more people with a greater amount of influence who are committed to systemic transformation in a really deep sense, like censorship, military-industrial complex, the quality of our soil, agriculture, big pharma, big tech. Like there's the big pieces of our society that have systemic corruption and have an enormous impact on the quality of our civilization, those systems are going to be challenged by the people who are currently in the administration. And so in some regards, I think it was a win for the independent movement from this vantage point to try and kind of assess all things considered, because as I mentioned before, there's a greater independent spirit and energy that is now having executive level influence over this nation. There's a lot more for us to talk about tonight, but that's maybe the start to the conversation.
Yeah, I can see that through the independent lens. And then there is this huge polarization of the left, the people on the left who are really in a great deal of terror, grief, devastation, heartbreak. These are really the words that are being used by the people who are shocked at what has occurred and really terrified about what is going to happen next. They're not seeing through the same lens that I hear you speaking through around systemic change, around these important systems that need to be changed. I think probably most people would agree that these systems need to be changed. But then there are the issues of trans rights and gay rights and women's rights and immigrants' rights and all of these, and all of these human rights that people are really afraid are going to be lost because of the idea that actually what's happening is not the independent movement part of the support for Trump, but the far right support for Trump, because really Trump rallied both. He had the far right support, which we can see in the Project 2025 documentation, and then he had the support of the independent movement, which is the RFK,
Tulsi Gabbard.
Tulsi Gabbard, right.
Elon Musk. All that.
And we don't know. What is he going to do to balance those two, which actually seem quite different? And it seems like the people who were really rooting for a female president and, really praying for women's rights and trans rights, gay rights, immigrant rights, all planetary, climate change rights. How do we bridge the polarization as independent-minded Americans?
So I think I want to introduce the term sense-making. It's an important term to establish. Most people maybe aren't familiar with that as a technical term, but it's a very important one. I'll give you a really simple example. You're at work, and you get a phone call, and someone tells you that your father passed away. You're going to have a major reaction to that, or whatever your reaction is going to be. Let's say somebody calls you a couple minutes later and says, oh, that person that called you was drunk and not coherent, and it's not actually true information. Your father's not dead. So how you relate to that news is going to be based upon how much you believe or agree that news to be true. And if you get new information, you see it from a different perspective, then all of a sudden your entire emotional reaction to that moment is completely transformed in a moment when you get different perspective. So when we look at the information that the far left has been getting, or the left has been getting over the last year or more, over the last multiple years about Trump, we have to take into account the fact that the people that have been delivering that information are extremely biased, and biased in a completely objective and understandable sense, right? Like if you have a lawyer who's making an argument for a defendant, the jury knows that that lawyer has an agenda. The agenda is to get them to X, Y, and Z. So people that are consuming information from the left, first and foremost, have to have the sense-making capacity to know that nobody that's driving that narrative, that propaganda, whether it's a candidate or anyone around it or any media institution that are serving that, are attempting to provide a public service announcement and general education of academic grade information. They are 100% trying to say every single thing with every morsel of energy and attention available to them to get people to polarize away from Trump and towards the left, by way of getting dollars and support leading up to the election moment in time, and then ultimately in November to get the votes. So first and foremost, people have to realize that the information they've been getting has been trying to convince them of something, which the people that are giving that information have every incentive to be able to get them to be convinced for. So when people are giving other people information with the intent to convince them, they are almost inherently manipulating them, and they are contorting information. They are looking for clips that confirm a narrative, and they're basically engineering a way that people are thinking about the situation. So that's my first point I want to give to the left, is that you have been under an intense fire hose of information that's been intended to manipulate you. Now, I'm not saying there's no veracity or truth in that information. I'm just saying as you make sense of the information that you have to know it's been coming from people that have an agenda to get you to hate a particular person in order to support another particular person to get their interests met. When you think about it from that perspective, then you ask the question, okay, well, what's factually true? Because the example that I gave about the phone call and your dad's dead, your dad's not dead, when you start to realize that I could be getting different information from people, then you have to ask the question, what's actually true? Because I should have an emotional relationship and take action based upon what's actually true, not just what people wanted me to think was true so that I would donate to a campaign or vote. So now this becomes a really important moment in time. The election's over. Now, yes, the left is going to keep trying to persuade them to give them dollars and that kind of a thing. But now
let me pause on that for a moment. The left is going to continue to persuade them to give dollars and that sort of thing. When you say that, what exactly are we talking about? What is the left that's going to persuade who to give dollars to what?
Right. Yeah, I mean, so the left can be a reference to the Democratic Party. It can be a reference to the media institutions that support that perspective and that narrative. There are thousands of organizations and nonprofits that are a part of this left institution that, stand for LGBTQ rights, that stand for anti-racism, that stand for a lot of these social issues that have been pegged to the left. So all their fundraising apparatuses are about to start turning on and start saying, oh, well, we elected Trump, but now we've got to really X, Y, and Z to make sure that he doesn't A, B, and C. So that's the narratives that are about to come out that are going to start to get people to donate money and keep getting more involved. And we're also need to start looking at the 2026 midterm election, and the left, or the Democratic Party, is going to immediately start to galvanize attention and resources and commitment for people to participate in the midterm election to be able to try and win the House and regain the Senate for the Democratic Party, and see that as the next battleground politically and electorally, and use this moment in time to be able to polarize, oh, we lost that because why? Because our volunteers didn't knock enough doors, because our donors didn't give enough money. So they're going to use the loss of Trump to be able to justify why more energy should go into the left. And there's just so much we could say about this conversation. I heard Jill Stein, one of the leaders of the Green Party and this current candidate for the Green Party, presidential candidate, and her and many other people have said along the lines of that the Democratic Party is the place where authentic social movements go to die. Because what happens is the Democratic Party, it attracts all the people that have these progressive perspectives. It says, oh, this is the place where those things are going to be tended to. And it seems like they're just kind of looking for the next pieces to plug into, because they're trying to build their base and they're trying to be able to build some type of emotional justification for why people should donate to them. And so it's very typical that the left is going to harp on these particular topics. And there are plenty of people on the left who really care about abortion issues, really care about treating immigrants with dignity and respect, really care about other issues of transgender mentioned things you mentioned. But from my assessment, there's a lot of people who just know that those are the talking points that do the in-group, out-group thing, that get the donor dollars, that speak a language to a base that keeps them relevant. So I have a lot of skepticism for the degree of authenticity that exists on the side of the Democratic Party. I have the same arguments and critiques with the right and Republican as well. So I'm completely and totally independent for both sides.
Right, that's what I was going to ask, is this unique to the Democratic Party, or is it both of the political, is it, okay, great, the Republican Party won, clearly. And,
Trump won.
Well, also
Yeah.
in the House.
Yes.
Also in the
yes,
Senate,
yes, that's
right?
correct.
I mean,
Yes,
the Republican Party won.
That's correct.
Right? And so now we've got this massive polarization. We don't have more unification, although some people are saying that the Trump win was a win for unity. I don't see that out in the world right now. I'm not seeing unity yet. So what I'm looking for is this question of like, who's the actual enemy? Who's the real enemy? Because I do believe there is an enemy. And I think it's important that there's an enemy, because I think it's part of what gives people energy to take action, to do something. And if we don't have an enemy, then we don't. And so who is the enemy? And do you agree that there is an enemy, that there should be an enemy, that we need an enemy actually to fuel something?
We don't need an enemy. That's point number one. We have the ability to live in peace and harmony. Mm-hmm. I think there's two different ways to think about enemy. One is by way of people, and one is by way of systemic dynamics. Yeah. My vantage point, personally, is I'm not pointing the finger of any individual enemy. If we look at enemy from the standpoint of domestic and abroad, then you could make a case that we have international enemies. You could make a case about Russia, you could make a case about Iran, you could make a case about North Korea, you could make a case about China. Ultimately, I think that we and our actions have created those enemies. And so it's really more like blowback than it is enemy. But then if you look at it internally and domestically, do we have an enemy? I would say that the enemy that exists domestically is any dynamic, any system, including the actions of people within those systems, but mostly people are part of larger systems, that would have any choice be made in public institutions that are more in service to profit interests than general distributed public interests. So that's the dynamic to have your eye out for. And to kind of come back to this conversation that you were bringing forward, I believe that public manipulation is a dynamic that is undermining the quality and health of our republic. So anything that's undermining the quality and health of our republic is enemy-ish. So I think that the way that Trump was highly manipulative and in-group, out-group, and hate and judgment in his narrative was antithetical to the ultimate best interest of our republic. And to every single degree that Kamala Harris or Biden or anyone else on the left did the same thing, the exact same logic applies. That we will not be able to run a healthy republic until we don't actually need to manipulate each other to be able to move our political missions forward. Now, having said that, in the current state of affairs, we don't have a citizenry that's resilient against manipulation yet. So it's actually impossible right now to win an election without manipulating, because we're so deep in this process. So it's a bigger conversation of a whole generation rising that's not culturally programmed to expect to be manipulated through in-group, out-group dynamics in order for us to be able to have people to run election campaigns that don't use manipulative tactics to be able to get enough votes to be able to win. Because if you just have a bunch of candidates who don't manipulate people and never get enough votes to win, and you have candidates that do manipulate people and get enough votes to win, then like, what's the real value of not manipulating people? Because you never end up with any public authority or influence to be able to do anything useful. So we're living in a really deeply entrenched dynamic, and this whole thing needs to and can be rooted out.
This is what I want to talk about. This is the actual dynamic. So I woke up the other day and I felt very clear. I had this clear knowing, if we polarize, they win. And I posted this on Facebook. If we polarize, they win. I didn't think about it. I just felt it. I knew that this was true, and I said, we need to rise. But I hadn't really thought about who's the we, what's the they. I just posted it, and then it's created a lot of conversation that brought me a lot of clarity that really comes to what you just indicated and brought forward. Who is the they? It's not humans, it's systems.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we created this thing called a corporation, and this corporation is this thing that extracts profit and then gives it to their shareholders. So that's a dynamic that was invented, which I think you could make an argument that it has created an enormous amount of prosperity and economic success, and allowed for incredible innovation and invention, and has driven human civilization forward in a really profoundly significant and positive way. That's one argument. In another argument, we invented the system that just like consumes and eats anything, and profit motivations are so powerful that it can bend anything, including government. So over the last 150 years, our government has been bending into the pressure of these profit interests, because a successful company that's profitable has so much extra resource, they can spend so much money on lobbying or bribery or other types of offers or corruption, that if you got a huge amount of cash and power, then you can have public institutions bend to your will, according to current situation. Give me 20 years or so, and that's not actually going to be possible anymore.
Well, that's right. So how do we make our way out of this reality where we are in many ways trapped by systemic challenges that manipulate us for profit? Because that's what I got clear about as everybody spoke in the comments, and some people don't want to believe in duality, and they know the oneness, and they see that, we need to live on this razor's edge of we're all one, and so we're not going to other anyone, which of course, ultimately, I think what we both see is, you're right, we don't need to have an enemy. I think we're a few generations away from that consciousness. And in our current reality, we do seem to need to have an enemy. The enemy then, not a human, but a system, a dynamic. We're in a reality where manipulation pays.
In every way.
In every way. And if we look at, okay, who is the they? What is the they? Okay, follow the profit. That's ultimately what I got to, is they is what profits from the manipulation. And how do we rise together to...
While we are entrepreneurs who run ads that slightly manipulate people to go into our calls to action, right? So we are also connected to those same dynamics. So I think that if we had to put something in the crosshairs, it would be manipulation itself. That we have an entire society that revolves around whoever can manipulate people better win. And what does manipulation mean? Right? Manipulation means that we are giving people information and conveying it with a certain amount of energetic emphasis that has a person step to the side of their own best interest, of their deeper truth, and their personal sovereignty. I believe that the degree to which the founders of this country were inspired and had the best interest in mind of this national experiment, and there was a range of different interests that were at the founding of this country, but to the degree that it was optimal, the idea was that if you have a republic and everybody's got a straight spine, and I say that as a metaphor, that they're thinking for themselves, they're making sense according to their own conscience, and they're making choices that they themselves feel right. That is a very resilient system, because it's very, very difficult to distort a public institution to serve profits if you have 1 million people who are all resilient against manipulation. And so that's the ideal that I believe this country is founded upon, and the ideal that we need to be able to approach in order to heal this very, very sick republic and reclaim our dedication to this experiment of democracy itself. So the center So I'd say there's two different things that will approach that. One is helping people to become more resilient against manipulation. And you can do that very simply. There's like 15 different standard tactics of manipulation. And when you educate a person on the typical tactics of manipulation, then they're able to start to perceive the information coming at them through those particular lenses. Oh, that's an ad hominem. Oh, that's a logical fallacy. Oh, that's whatever, right? And so when people just get basic education, then they can start to become resilient against manipulation. When you start to show people how impacted they are by being manipulated, starts to get a little bit gross. They get discontent. They start to feel uncomfortable. They've given their own individual agency away. So helping people and then building a culture around becoming resilient against manipulation, I think is going to be critical for the future. The other part of the equation is not allowing, from a legal standpoint, manipulation to be a standard way that we run our civilization. So all the way from, I don't think that candidates should be able to use standard manipulative tactics as a candidate. I think that should be illegal. I think there should be full accountability when that happens. We have accountability for campaign finance laws. Why can't we have accountability for speaking in a way that respects the sovereignty of the individual and not pushes them through corridors of manipulation?
I mean, that kind of presses right up against the desire for free speech, right? So one of the big things that Trump is already standing for post-election is ending any censorship.
Right.
How do we balance ending any censorship with standards of anti-manipulation?
Right. That is a very good question. And I didn't come tonight prepared with an answer to that question.
I mean, to me, it seems like the answer is what you're speaking about is personal resilience.
Right.
So that, sure, you can
try and manipulate me.
Yeah,
but
manipulate me all you want.
Totally.
And I am going to develop my own sovereign resilience so that I cannot be manipulated.
And right now, with so many sources of information, there's very little accountability for accuracy. And as we build a culture around fact-checking and accuracy, I believe that we're actually moving through a process that as each year that goes by, right? Like you didn't grow up with YouTube, for example. So your access to information was very, very limited. So now that the kids are growing up, whatever, with information coming from every different direction, I think they're able to see flavors of information that are different. If you grew up in just a Republican household, all Fox is the only thing you might know about how information gets to you. So I think that we're going through a process of awakening, kind of moving through this information age. And ultimately, I hope and pray that the rising generation is going to have less willingness to be perpetually and incessantly manipulated. I also think that we need to bring it right into education for kids in civics, that we talk about these principles from very, very early age. I have a 11-year-old, and he's aware of these types of dynamics. It's incredible to, I've influenced him for sure, but we talk about independence, we talk about thinking for ourselves. And so he has these lenses, maybe on manipulation, that a lot of adults might not have. So we can train a rising generation to be able to see the world through a different perspective.
And maybe even make impact with our parents. I did have one big win this week. My mom was extremely devastated. Like, we're in a family thread, as I think many families are. I don't know if you all have a family thread. And, my mom is posting the emoji with the two crying faces, and she's just very... she runs a lot of fear in her system, and she is just so, hand-wringing. I mentioned this word too, hand-wringing earlier. Hand-wringing, and she's just so worried for us, for our future, and she's saying things like, I'm just going to isolate myself and put myself in my own little insulated bubble and, just focus on what's good for me. I was like, that's great, Mom. What does that mean exactly? She's like, I am not watching the news anymore. I was so happy.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I was like, that is a great outcome.
Yeah.
Let's everybody, what happens if we actually turn off the national news? Like what a massive shift that could be in consciousness.
And we already are. Like statistically, we are turning off the national news, and podcasts are getting way more visibility. Mm-hmm. There was the statistics on how many people watched RFK's side debate on Twitter versus the actual people that were live watching, I believe, on CNN. And it was like crazy. There was more people that were watching it on an alternative media source. So we're starting to get our information from these different directions. I think your mom had this moment yesterday or whatever, but all these other people are having this moment a week ago or a month ago or a year ago and starting to get more information from, I'll use podcasters for example. And I think Joe Rogan's a decent example of a podcaster where I haven't listened to a lot of his content, but just recently I've seen a couple of his pieces. And what I observe is like an earnestness for truth. I observe he's not trying to manipulate a perspective. He's just getting more information. He's listening to what this expert might have to say. And I think that's a good modeling of the energetic. He's not really trying to like drive a point down your throat. He's trying to give you information that might leave you feeling more empowered, that might leave you being able to make more choice for yourself because you're more informed. And that's the direction that we want to go. And when information's coming at you, you can put things into two different categories. Information that's trying to educate you so that you become more empowered to make a choice that you believe is right in your conscience, or information that's trying to tell you what choice is right. It's a very, very easy assessment. Is this information trying to tell me what's right? If it is, I should ask 30 more follow-up questions. What's their motivation? What's the degree of accuracy of their facts? Why are they trying to get me to believe this? What happens if I go along with their perspective? What aspects of reality am I becoming disconnected from by further believing somebody's version of reality who's trying to convince me to make a choice that they want me to make, right? So these are very standard practices that we can start to talk about to become more resilient against manipulation and more ready to make sense on our own, which I think is a fundamental prerequisite for us to be able to really do anything else useful from this place.
Well, and that's, again, part of why I wanted to have this conversation today is because I think that the sense making is possibly at an all-time low right now. That's what I'm...
Because the polarization is an all-time high.
Because the polarization is at an all-time high. The emotions are at an all-time high. I think misinformation is at an all-time high. And I don't think that people have the wherewithal, the skills, the ability to overcome their own trauma response to what occurred, to be able to sense make in a way that allows us to take really good, wise steps going forward, other than, hey, my mom said she's going to turn off the news. That's a good step. I'm so happy about that. And yet I'm seeing a lot of folks in my community that I hear saying things that concern me. I feel worried that the way that they've been manipulated is so significant that they're not actually going to be able to take right action in the next stage. And so let's talk about what might right action be if you are somebody who is absolutely terrified. You've been manipulated to the point where you believe you have to leave your state, possibly, because your rights are not going to be honored, which could be the case. That could be true. But you feel that way. You're like terrified you have to leave your state. You're terrified that your family is going to be deported, which also could be true if your family is here illegally. You're terrified that your children are not going to be respected for their choices around their sexuality or their gender. And you are terrified that as a woman, you are going to lose rights over your body, because this is the narrative that people are sitting with.
Yeah, there's a lot there. What people can do, I think step number one is watch the next 10 minutes. Obviously, this video will only reach so many people. And there's some people that are watching this video that we can talk to directly. I want to be very clear that I have never been a Trump supporter. I did not vote for Trump. I did not encourage anyone to vote for Trump. And my position was to stay independent from the entire left-right piece, despite RFK and other people that I respect getting behind Trump. So I am not at all coming from the vantage point of trying to defend my position or to create my own confirmation bias by trying to convince you of something that leaves me feeling more right. I'm completely neutral on the topic. As a neutral observer, my assessment is that Trump himself is not a far conservative person that's going to inflict conservative values upon our country, like Khomeini and the Islamic Republic after their revolution inflicted Islamic law across their country and like applied this religious law that completely undermined the civil rights of Iran at that period of time. My concern that Trump is going to do that is 0%. I think that there's ways that he appealed to that far right base as a way of getting votes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole narrative that Trump will be taken out, Vance will be put into the presidency, and that is his plan. Hence, through the whole Project 2025 thing, which I know you really haven't looked into, but that is one big fear, right? Is that Trump gets taken out, Vance is in.
Right.
Project 2025 comes. It is exactly like what happened in Iran, and we all lose our rights, and we never vote again. This is a big narrative.
I'm facilitating a WhatsApp group that has about 400 people in it, and I stopped the WhatsApp group because I didn't have the bandwidth to moderate, and it was starting to polarize more and more. I was like, this isn't going to happen in my group. I'm just going to pause the ability. And then one of my friends, who happened to be an admin in the group, had the ability to post, unbeknownst to myself, and made a post about sharing Trump's interview with Joe Rogan. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like it was this like right-leaning piece. And so I said, hey, everyone, like this right-leaning thing happened. Like whoever's got a long form of Kamala Harris, just give it to me and I'll post it in the group. We'll kind of balance it out. We'll get back to neutral for a minute. Nothing. A friend who was very much on the left was like, well, here's some other stuff to share instead. And he shares this dramatized video of this narrative where like Trump gets in, then he dies, then Vance becomes president, Vance is president for like 3 terms, and then all this kind of stuff.
Forever.
Yeah, and it was
we
like
never vote again.
And I was like, just give me something that's a long form of Kamala, so we can get to know Kamala more, just like we got to know Trump more through this Joe Rogan podcast. And the only thing he had was this like hyper extreme manipulative narrative piece around it. And so I thought that was kind of interesting to me that that was like the best of neutral. It's like, look at this horrible solution if all of these negative prophecies occur. My sense is that whole narrative is a constructed narrative to create fear, to build energy for why people should support and vote for Kamala. Could any weird thing happen? Totally. Like, could Kamala have gotten elected and she turns out to be the evil dictator that kills all Christians? Like, sure. Well,
I mean, we can look at what the narrative is. If Kamala got elected, then the narrative was that in that case, then the globalists that are backing the Democratic Party are going to take all of our rights. So in either side, fascism and tyranny were the end results they
were the focal point of the fear-mongering.
The fear-mongering was focused on
that scenario, that dystopic scenario. Yeah. And literally, like you and I have been watching this. Like, how many times is his most important election in history? Right, every election they say, right, because that's a mechanism to polarize and to make the donations, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so I want to step back for a second. So divide and conquer, right? Primary rule of empire, that if you are running an empire, it is impossible for all of human history to control a huge amount of people over a huge amount of territory without them fighting each other. When they're fighting each other, now you can do the thing because their energy is focused like this and not like this.
This is exactly what I meant when I said, if we polarize, they win.
Yeah, totally. So stick with me for a minute, okay, right? So let me bring another example forward. So all kinds of tyrants in human history, so many of them. And in this last 100, 150 years, we have all different tyrant examples from South America to Asia to Eastern Europe. And tyrants get to a situation where they get into power through some type of violence or some type of electoral process. But however they get there, they stay there. And once they're there, there's no one taking them out. And because of that power, they're going to start to bend the country interests into their personal interests. And over a couple decades, then the country is going to become poorer that tyrant's going to become richer, and the people are going to become more discontent. As people become more discontent, this tyrant has to become more violent to keep these people from ousting this person. So they're going to become more and more violent, but the more violent they become, the more upset these people are going to become. Now they're being killed, persecuted, and they're starving. Now they have nothing to lose. Now they storm the castle because who cares if they get killed in the process? This is a natural process. So right before this tyrant was ousted, they were at their maximum degree of applying violence to their people to maintain their power. Our country uses hyperpolarization like a typical tyrant would use violence. So as the authority of the existing establishment is becoming more and more in question, our narratives are becoming more and more polarized because they're using polarization with a divide and conquer tactic as the way to maintain their power as long as possible so that people are still thinking this way as opposed to like, what the crap system were you a part of? So I'm watching polarization increase as a natural function. Like I would say probably the degree of extreme polarization is probably correlated to the degree that more people are declaring themselves to be independents. Because when they say they're independents, like, I'm no longer going to do this thing. Okay, well, we got to really rev up those narratives to give people one more reason to jump back in to that hyperpolarized narrative. So in this election cycle, we got to the extremist degree possible, which is if our person isn't elected, the entire world will be over, right? That's the most extreme version of hyperpolarization.
We will lose all of our rights.
Everything. It's either vote for our person or total dystopia, and it's going to be your fault. So this is all just like, blah. Like we need to barf. We are being manipulated to a really extreme degree. And we need to recognize that that's what's happening. Recognize that that's an indication that the powers that be or the systems that have been holding power, that want to hold power, are realizing that they are at the end degree of their ability to hold power as they have. And that's why they're going so extreme into polarization. So that's like a really, really good sign. That's like if the battering ram is hitting the castle door, the degree to which that system is driving hyperpolarization is the degree to which splinters and hinges are falling and there's one or two more cracks in the door before the door comes down and the people are able to rush the castle and create regime change. So, and then when I say regime change, that's a very interesting concept because we have a government full of many, many thousands of elected officials, many, many thousands of appointed officials, and all kinds of agencies that aren't even held accountable to the electoral process whatsoever. So our systems change, our revolution is going to have to do with who's in office and who's appointed to these positions and their degree of legitimate orientation to not be serving private interests, but to be serving the people, correlated with an active campaign to reform government. So that government becomes transparent, accountable, and that we focus on empowering citizen participation as opposed to disincentivizing citizen participation by making it something that people don't want to be a part of because it's either too complex or it's full of hate language or whatever. Like I feel like our American people are disincentivized to really be actively involved in a really meaningful way. They're incentivized when it comes to election time, but that is a minority part of what it means to be a citizen of a republic. Like being a part of city council, like caring about what the budgets are being allocated to, like pushing back when people in elected positions are using authority in a self-serving way. Like this is like, it's a full-time job really to be an active member of a republic and requires citizens to be full-time active members in order to maintain a healthy democracy. So we need to focus on citizen empowerment inside of a context of transparent and accountable government. So if we, over the next 10 and 20 years, become more effective at electing people who are committed to public interest rather than private interests, and more effective at driving reforms that make government more fair, accountable, and participatory, that's how we navigate this full conversion process that's going to have to happen over the next 2 decades. And I think to bring it back to this moment in time, from where I'm sitting right now, if I had to pick which of those paths I think was optimal for this systemic transformation process to be undergo, I think we got that path. So I think that RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk, and a whole range of other actors being a part of the national administration is a positive in service to that conversion process that I just talked about. And the videos that I've seen that have come out from Trump since the election, I have been blown away. And I don't care if it was Trump's idea or not to have this incredible video about anti-censorship. It was immaculate and powerful. And I don't know if it's his idea. It's not his idea to be talking about the toxins in the soil that get into our food that have a whole myriad of health effects. Like, these are the conversations that must be occurring for the systemic transformation I'm talking about to occur. And they are happening, and our president-elect is talking about them for the first time in American history, to have a president talking about these systemic issues. So that's a win. Like, objectively, that's a win. And when I see that happening, and again, I'm not trying to defend anyone, and I see that people on the left are saying this is the downfall of human civilization, I'm saying, no, literally, like, the things that are most important to be talking about are being talked about and given national airtime.
Well, okay, so let's address the real trauma response in the disenfranchised people, women, immigrants, gay, transgendered people who are really afraid and in a real trauma response, because in the not so distant past, we didn't have rights. We didn't have rights. And now, great, we're talking about soil and censorship, but like, what about my rights? And that trauma response is, it seems to me, a response of panic that that I'm going to go back to some version of not being able to vote, not being able to get credit, being treated like property, not having control over my own body, not being able to make choices in my own body. These are like real personal fears. Sure, censorship, we don't want that. Sure, we want healthy soil, but like, what about me, right? This is, just...
Totally. No, I'm with you.
How do we meet that real fear, right? So I'll just say, I don't personally feel that fear. I don't personally feel that fear because I have so much personal power. I have a lot of privilege. I have a tremendous amount of resilience. I don't feel that I can be corrupted or manipulated. I feel if my daughter needed to have an abortion, I would find a way that she would have an abortion if that was what needed to happen. I identify in the queer community, and I don't feel afraid of that. If I want to engage with anybody sexually, I feel completely empowered to be able to do that. And I don't see any situation in which anybody could take that away from me. I don't see that I'm going back into a concentration camp. So I don't have those fears. And I can at the same time understand people who do.
Totally.
And that's really, what I want to address.
Yeah, and I think that your first point is a direct transmission to the people that have those fears, that you are a woman and that you don't. Yeah. And I think that gives permission for people to maybe be a little bit less afraid. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, well, I'm a woman, I'm afraid of these things. She's a woman, she's not afraid of these things. Interesting. Maybe there's a little bit more space. So I just want to own that was very powerful. You weren't just making a point, you were actually offering real hope to people that might be so deep in fear and panic right now. Second, I'm not here with a crystal ball to say that I know what's going to happen. I can understand this like domino effect thought process that if Vance is Christian have conservative morals and ethics, and those have been antagonistic to the progressive movement for 100 years, and if Trump died and Vance would become the president, then he would have this moral religious opportunity to impose all of these religious, dictates. Okay, I can see that. as something that someone could be afraid of and concerned about. I think that I've seen a lot of videos since the election saying, great, if we were so afraid of all these things, then we need to make sure that we're standing up to be resilient against those things occurring. I think that that's a good general principle, that if people are not feeling like their rights are things that they can take for granted, that's going to put them more on the edge of their seat as an active citizen. They're going to care more about what's happening. They'll watch more closely to executive orders, to votes that are happening in Congress, to budget allocations. Or this is a good thing. So I saw when Trump was elected in 16 going into 2017 that an enormous amount of people that had been completely asleep to politics woke the crap up and fast. Like, oh, we'll just kind of go along like, yeah, there's like Bush and Clinton and Obama and I'm just gonna do my thing. And then there's like Trump, right? People are like, wait, what? I left my hands off the steering wheel and that happened? Oh my God. And then all these people got involved in politics that weren't involved in politics before because Trump was elected. I think that was a good thing. If in this moment in time, there's a whole bunch of people are saying, I don't know if my rights are safe, I'm gonna pay more attention, I'm gonna learn what's required to protect them, I'm gonna become more civically empowered, that's a really good thing. And we might look back 20 years from now and be like, aren't we so glad that Trump was elected and there was this like right-leaning or left-imposed narrative on the right that the conservative Christian would take all the rights away. And in that moment in time, so many millions of Americans woke up and got more civically engaged. Mm-hmm. That's fantastic.
That's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the opportunity to move this trauma through our bodies, to actually like feel. Actually feel the devastation, not in a way that others, the humans that voted for Trump, because that's part of what's happening, is like the people that are feeling the fear are othering the humans. That's where the polarization, othering the humans, like I don't want to be in community with that person who let Trump get in, and I just don't think that's the way.
Totally.
I think that the way is to actually feel the devastation of the societal choices that led to somebody with really bad character getting elected to the highest level of office, in our country, and like to actually feel that devastation and not be pointing at the people, but at the system and saying, okay, so now I'm going to actually feel that all the way through, which we don't necessarily know how to do as a people. Something that you've actually helped me with a lot in my own process is to go into the depths of my feeling, to be able to move trauma through my body. So I want to talk about that. And then on the other side of that, be able to become a more resilient and powerful person so that I can make choices that will change the system rather than othering the people. Because we need to come together and rise together, not against each other, because that's part of the entire manipulation structure that is keeping us in these repeating trauma loops.
Yeah. So my definition of independent is someone who thinks, speaks, and acts according to their own conscience. And I feel like this definition has a lot of medicine, a lot of value in everything you just shared in this inquiry that you have. I believe that our optimal potential as an American citizen is to be independent. I think for myself, I speak for myself, I act for myself, and I participate in stewarding our republic through that individually sovereign perspective and vantage point. And so I say it, and I also kind of model it with like my body language to be able to help to create a distinction that if we're like afraid or if we're just like gullible and eating up other people's narratives and then spitting them out, if our energies are like this, we're not independent. We're not in our agency. We're not even free. And we're not in our individual sovereignty, which is a word that more and more people are using these days. And so that's what I invite everybody first and foremost is like, take a moment and inhale. exhale. And bring the top of your head a little bit closer to the ceiling. Straighten your spine. And remind yourself that you're responsible in the meaning making that you make. And shed off any influence from anybody who's been trying to manipulate you for their own benefit. And just shake it off. You know, the term fear-mongering is a term for a reason, because the thing that politicians do to scare people to vote for them. So you have been a victim of fear-mongering, period. Shake it off. Doesn't mean that there's no truth to any points, but you cannot even make an argument that you have not been a victim to fear-mongering. So you gotta just shake it off, right? And when we shake that off, then it creates a little bit of space around us. Because that fear-mongering gets right here. There's no space to think for yourself.
It's like choking.
Yeah, there's no, because if you have a thought for yourself, they're not able to control you the same way. So we want to get you right up here. So you just create a little personal space. Okay, all of you other influences, whatever, give me 3 freaking feet. This is my space. What do I choose to believe? How do I choose to relate to this present moment with the highest amount of empowerment? The vision that I have, and I pray that it's possible, is that we raise a whole generation of leaders. And we get out of have a whole generation of like groupthink sheeple followers. And that it feels a way to be a powerful leader. And that we start to see the distinction of like, oh wow, like this is me and my power, and this is like me and my fear. And I want to more often feel like this and less often feel like this. Okay? So let's start to like move our way through that process. And in that, we're going to have to feel all of our emotions, like you said, because to kind of be in these, okay, this is the soundbite that was told to me, and so this is the way that I should think about it, and this is the way that I should repeat that soundbite to somebody who agrees with me, and this is the way that I should use that soundbite as a combative point to somebody who agrees the opposite way. Like we're being totally programmed the whole time. And so when we create that space, we can now start to have a little bit more space to consider our own truth and feel our own relationship to things. And I think that you're making really important points that like women could have a collective trauma of being repressed in a myriad of different systemic ways, politically and otherwise.
Financially, legally. I mean, again,
physically.
Physically, it was just not that long ago. You know,
Totally.
We didn't have the right to vote. We didn't have the right to get credit. We didn't have the right to start businesses without our husband's permission. You know, this is just not that long ago.
And so now let's like start to think, and I don't know the numbers here, but what percentage of Americans are a stand for basic women's rights to vote, to all the things you're saying? Like, there's a minority of Americans that might be like, let's turn the clock back.
Totally.
But
there's that guy. There's that guy on YouTube.
But that's like a minority,
Yeah.
right? So if people that are concerned about this,
Yeah.
they should start to create content and appeal to the common sense of all Americans on the importance of protecting basic women's rights. So that's an
basic
example.
Human rights.
That's an example of a generative act. But here's something I want to create a distinction on: the topic of abortion.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to conjoin access to abortion and women's rights. It's very easy to do that. I have friends on all different perspectives on this topic. I personally have had all different experiences on this topic in a number of different ways. So it's very easy to say women's rights means they have a right to abortion. There's a church that's right down the street from my house. And if you drive by it, you'll see in the front of the church, there's this little artistic demonstration. And it's probably about 10,000 little crosses on their lawn. And it's representing babies that have been killed through abortion. Okay. So I'm driving on the road and I'm looking at that and I'm feeling emotionally how many people that are part of that congregation that are horrified by killing a child. We've all been child. We've raised children that weren't aborted and were adopted or otherwise became great people who became our spouse or our whatever. Like, oh my God, I'm so glad that human is alive and made it. So this topic of abortion is not as cookie cutter, and there's a lot of women in that church who would not agree that abortion equals women's rights. This is a conversation about, a much more sensitive topic. And I think that when we look at the space that was created for the states to make this choice for themselves when Roe versus Wade was turned back and the federal government no longer controlled states' position on abortion, I don't think that is a turning back the clock on women's rights. I think what it is it's bringing the country back to the origin of 50 different sovereign states that are able to create policies that are a reflection of the majority of intent of the citizens of those respective states. And very few things are more violating than an individual who does not believe in abortion being in a state where their tax dollars are being used to conduct abortions. That is an extreme degree of violation of that individual. And so...
And vice versa, somebody living in a state where they are terrified that their child will either be raped or have an ectopic pregnancy and not have access.
That's terrifying.
To an abortion.
Totally.
So it's just terror on both sides.
Correct.
Of that aisle.
And so we have to remember that we are in a super state. The United States of America is a super state. And our different states, we can think about them more like the different countries in Europe by way of like size and geography and population than as like provinces, like subcomponents of a nation. And we've agreed to be able to have a fabric of national federal government to be able to hold us all together so that we can become more prosperous together and so we can better defend our collective borders. We need to remember that. And when the federal government starts to get too strong, we've lost sight of that thing entirely. So I think it's very important when we pull back that control over abortion that the federal government had over all 50 states, and then it revealed the different perspectives that different majorities of citizens in a state have on the particular topic. It's reminding us of state sovereignty. And you said it before, and this is gonna sound cold, but I think it's something that's worth really having a real hearty conversation about, which is physical mobility.
Totally.
And like that, I think the way that we're gonna solve a lot of our intractable problems is by going deeper at the state level, by having states be able to create their own unique apparatuses of how do they do taxation, how do they apply public budget, what are their policies, and then you put yourself in a state that most aligns with your values and the various circumstances you might find yourself in. And that could be a way that we move forward and get out of the situation. And then we have greater respect for the different states and they're representing. And then we get to celebrate the fact that we are willing to still work together for common defense and that our diversities aren't breaking us apart because we're moving into a higher level of sophistication for how we run our nation.
Yeah, so I think that this is where we get to begin to bring things together of like, what do we do? What do we get to do if we are in this place of, oh my God, what just happened? Half of the country is against me and I'm then now against them. And how do I actually deal with that? And how do we move into this rise so that we aren't polarizing against the wrong things? And I think this idea of mobility is, many people would say, well, that's a privileged position.
I understand that.
And I would like to get everybody into their highest degree of privilege.
Totally. And like if I was going to be thinking about applying federal money towards enabling something, some program that would enable mobility over like a 10-year process is something that I'd be pretty inspired to be able to counterbalance the privilege side with like government support so that it could actually be more viable to support relocation or something like that. That's a different conversation for a different day.
I love that idea.
Yeah, totally, right? I mean,
Right.
you and I both know, like, the money, like, it's all about prioritization.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about solutions and going forward and becoming more empowered. I think there's just a moment in time for people to not be a political couch potato.
Yeah.
And not even be a social media political activist.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's really not political activism. It's really just the ability to kind of keep being right and keep like being afraid. You know, like that's what's really the more. Like, there's some people that are really authentically activists, but mostly I think people are just like caught in a process. Go to state
And their attention is being harvested.
Completely.
Right? Like that's our most valuable resource is our attention. What am I going to do with my time, energy, and attention? Money I can always make more of. Time, energy, and attention, once it's taken, it's taken.
Have you ever been in a conflict with someone that you loved and you found yourself just on your phone just going like this?
Never.
That's
never happened.
Right. So if you're on social media and you're having that experience, it's going to keep you on the platform. Yeah. It's going to keep you engaged. Yeah. So we need to like recognize all of these ways, and then you can serve more ads and all that kind of a thing. So go to city council meeting. Just find out when it is, where it is, and just go. Even if you aren't connected to the agenda at all, just put yourself in the public forum. Consider the next election cycles in your community. When is city council and mayor up for vote? When are county commissioners up for votes? When are the state representatives up for votes? And start to educate yourself and start to get curious on who is running for those offices. I know a lot of people that are tied into the RFK Elon Musk camp, and they're having this, and I'm tangentially connected to all of that, having this very like powerful experience of like, oh my gosh, all of my friends are moving into the executive administration. So there's this feeling of like euphoria almost when you realize like the them and the they and the thing over there just got a lot more accessible. So there's nothing to say that someone that you know in your community can't become the next city council person, the next mayor, the next member of your state legislation that is then making decisions about state laws. And yeah, you can petition on reform issues that then the state legislators might end up voting on, or you can just help to decide who's going to be a state legislator, and you can then communicate with them what matters to you, or you yourself can run for office and become that. And a lot of state legislators aren't even full-time positions. There are a lot of volunteer positions. They meet for a couple different weeks, different points of the year, and they have other full-time paying jobs. So the point that I'm making is this is a moment in time to drop the veil that's made us feel different between us and government. Mm-hmm. We are government. Mm-hmm. That is our government. It is doing what is a reflection of what we are allowing and tolerating. The people are always more powerful when they know their own power, when they have a vision, and when they're willing to persevere to bring that vision into action. The people are always the most powerful. Mm-hmm. So it's a moment in time for us to remember that there's nothing out there that's big enough and strong enough and powerful enough and dystopic enough to be able to suppress the people. So
when we gather,
when we are clear, when we have a vision, when we work together, and when we find a deeper sense of unity, right? So the colonies that came together to declare independence from Britain, like we can come together to declare independence from what? Not from the left or the right, from systemic issues that are manipulating the public, from systemic issues that put profit interests above private interests. Like our country has a horrible track record of doing heinous things. We've assassinated all kinds of presence of other countries because they didn't sell bananas to our banana companies at prices that we wanted them to sell bananas to us. And so we've just literally blown up their airplanes. We have gotten involved in all kinds of wars that have wreaked havoc. We have been arms dealers around the world. We have stirred up all kinds of conflicts. So I'm not even going to talk about 9/11 right now, and I'm not going to talk about COVID right now. But you can just maybe get some implications on how I feel about those particular topics. Our country has done horrible things. And we haven't rioted and protested to that at a systemic level. This is a moment in time for us to recognize that there's not a they that's just got it all figured out. There's a they that has their angle on next quarter's profits figured out and is bending public institution to serve that objective. That's definitely the case. But we have a blank canvas for what we want the future to be. Yeah. And we have to recognize that there's no one that's going to do it for us, that our government isn't a good guy or a bad guy. It's full of people that are making choices because the people, mostly the people that are in those positions, are looking out for themselves. And there's an opportunity for us to create a phase change. And I see that as declaring independence from how the system has been, which has primarily had impunity or lack of accountability to doing all kinds of horrible things. And so that's why our organization is called United Independents, because this is a moment in time where we're bringing independents who are not inside of this toxic polarization of left versus right, who have, 51% of Americans has said, I'm not a part of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. To me, that says it all. It says that the people are saying, I don't want to be manipulated anymore. I don't buy it anymore. I'm not going to do the lesser two evils thing anymore. And that number used to be like 35%, now it's like 51%. It's going to keep going up. And so our organization is helping to be able to create the infrastructure so that more and more people can get elected as independents and not be reinforcing this hyperpolarization through their political activities, pulling attention away from the polarization, pulling financial resources away from the polarization, pulling votes away from the polarization. And independence isn't just like a third group. Like there's like Republicans and Democrats, independents. There's parties that have a huge track record of serving corporate interests on both sides.
Right. But just to be very clear.
Yeah.
It's the same.
It's
Republican,
the same, yeah.
Democrat.
Totally.
It's the same.
And the Republican used to more serve the military-industrial complex. Now it seems like the Democrats more serve the military. So it's even toggling between like which sectors, right? But regardless, you have deeply entrenched parties that serve corporate interests, and then you have people that are not serving that. And that's what I call independence. I think there's a lot of independents who are now having a greater influence on national politics because of this election. And now's the time for us to keep revving up that engine. And so our organization is running a campaign over the next 2 years to put a block of independents into Congress. Imagine if you had a block of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 independents that had their own independent caucus. So there wasn't just one aisle with two different groups. There was the fundamentally third thing, not a new party. A group of people are saying, we are not a part of parties. We represent people, not parties.
And they may be part of parties, but they're actually meta to the parties. They are independent-minded humans that are stewarding their public office.
Correct. And they're predominantly committed to serving those public interests. I just saw, who was it? It was somebody who just won a seat in Nevada, and she said, I am an independent Democrat, and I am not here to toe the party line or serve party interests, but to represent the people. That is the revolution.
Yeah.
That is oh wait, we're not in the same environment anywhere that we were before. Our elected officials aren't just doing what the parties are saying. Our parties aren't just doing what the corporation. There's like dissent and rebellion from the status quo happening all throughout the system. And I see it from my vantage point, and that gives me a huge amount of hope. And so I think the punchline isn't fighting over social issues. The punchline isn't fighting over economic issues. The punchline is fighting against corruption generally. It's fighting for more integrity in how our government functions. This is not going to sound very sexy, but it's fighting for procedural integrity, that like government offices go through the due diligence steps that they're mandated to go through to make certain decisions, that a government agency gets 3 bids on a contract before just selecting the one. But oh, it's an emergency situation, move quickly, so we picked the one. But the cost was ridiculously high, and it was to the brother of the elected official. That's not okay, right? So these are the types of like procedural integrity that we have to recommit to. Otherwise, we're just like, it's just a joke.
Yeah.
And we're just going along with it.
I would say it's fighting for transparent, accountable government that we can participate in meaningfully. That's something that the independent movement is really standing for. I would say it's fighting for our own sovereignty internally, right? Because that can be an internal war where I just feel like I want to collapse and like hate that guy because they did the thing that I didn't want them to do, rather than actually stand in my, okay, actually, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try and understand them and understand why, so that I can make better choices together with that person in my community. It is fighting for when I want to like not show up for Thanksgiving, right? I think I've heard a lot of this happening.
Oh, because of political polarization?
There's so much polarization in families. People are not like wanting to come to the Thanksgiving table.
And maybe if they don't have the tools and resources to communicate in a powered way, that might be a better choice this year.
Sure.
But not to run away from, to say, great, let me upskill.
Let me get the tools.
Let me get the tools so that next Thanksgiving I can hold space in a really beautiful way. If you are certain that the other side is evil, you are a part of the problem. Okay? If you are certain that the other side is evil, then you are a part of the problem. If you have curiosity, if you are willing to be humble and recognize that you may have been manipulated, if you are willing to love people who have a different perspective than you do, then you are part of the solution. So based upon that definition, you make a choice if you're a part of the problem or a part of the solution. And if there's something that you're worried and concerned about, you will never solve that problem by hating other people and blaming them for victimizing you. So just throw it in the garbage. It's never going to get the job done. It never has. If there's something you're concerned about, educate yourself on the topic, get more empowered, take action to ensure that you as a creator are producing the result, that you're inhabiting a reality that you've influenced. How can you influence the future to become more of what you believe would be a more beautiful version of it? And if you're asking that question, you're part of the solution. And if you're afraid that someone's just going to take your rights away and you're not doing anything about it, and you're telling everybody else that their rights are going to be taken away, and you're perpetuating the fear, you're part of the problem.
That's such a big one. That's such a big one. Because some of the people that I see that are doing that really believe that they're helping. They really believe that they're serving. And they're really good people that I actually really like when they're not doing that. But when they're doing that, I'm like, wait, we need to like take all of that time, energy, and attention that you're putting into that, perpetuating of the fear-mongering, and reallocate that resource, because it is such a valuable resource, that time, energy, and attention, and reallocate and put all of those minutes on the calendar that you've been doing that and put them into, okay, let's get together. Let's actually do something, not just say, look at these bad people, look at these bad people, look at these bad people. And let me just, so that it's absolutely crystal clear, what is the something that we get to do when they stop doing that? What is the something that we come together and do? Like
Yeah,
meet at the library?
No, I mean, there's very specific building blocks to being a part of this republic. Yeah. Okay, one of the building blocks is, what are the policies? What is okay and not okay? And if I don't agree with those policies, what are my paths towards reform? That is a very generative thing. And there's different types of reform. One reform can be through citizen initiatives that has nothing to do with the legislation. Citizens can put an initiative on the ballot, they can build awareness around it, other citizens can vote, and they can put things into law or take things out of a law that didn't even have to go through legislation, okay? Some things go through the legislative process. So now this is gonna have to do with deciding who's elected to be in your state legislation, and then influencing the people that are in the state legislation to vote a particular way on particular topics. Right? So there's like the whole domain of policy. We can go more into it, but I'm kind of like laying out the key pieces here. The other key pieces are who is stewarding the government. And ultimately, there's elected officials, and elected officials have a majority of an influence, if not all, of who the appointed people are. So the path towards who is running government is driven through the voting process. So that's powerful. So if you want to decide who is in office, then learn more about electoral campaigning. Learn more about campaign tech, around canvassing, around effectively influencing your community, around campaign finance laws, around how to be able to register as a candidate. Like, that's all the stuff there, and become a candidate or support candidates that you believe in and put your energy into that. Yeah. Okay, so that's the policy and that's the people. Now there's a third piece I'm gonna put in place, which is what I'm gonna refer to as accountability. When the people are out of line of the policies, how do we raise the red flag? How do we sound the alarm bell? Because it's really nice if you've got policies that say what should happen, right? We have a constitution that says what should happen, right? We should not have international war without a vote from Congress. And yet we have traversed away from that constitutional norm, and now we send weaponry and military personnel in all different types of special operations, including Iraq, like, without any particular congressional endorsement. So that's an example where we're totally out of alignment with the Constitution. There's elected officials that act unconstitutionally on a very regular basis. So that third piece is, how do we hold elected officials accountable when they're out of line? And there's a lot of facets of activism that we need to develop and generate. And visibility and communication is one part of that conversation. Lawsuits is another part of that conversation. The way we're going to create a healthy future is when every single American citizen knows how to file a lawsuit against an elected official who they observe to be operating outside their oath of office and unconstitutionally, and every elected official knows that. When that's the case, completely different reality. So becoming educated. We have a program called Local Stewards Academy, which is now held within the United Independent Leadership Forum, which literally teaches people how to file a lawsuit against an elected official who's taking an unconstitutional action. So, policy, election activities, accountability. If people that are concerned about the future of our country are putting their attention into capacitating themselves in those three regards, before they know it, they're not feel like a victim anymore. They're gonna feel like a creator. They're gonna feel like, okay, I see the path, right? And when Roe versus Wade was turned backwards, there was a number of states or activists within states who said, we want to make it a part of our state constitution to protect the right of abortion. And that was their generative act in response to that situation, which is completely valid. And there was a number of different states that had different aspects of abortion on the ballot in just now in November, and some of the different results. And many of them went from the federal government with Roe versus Wade controlled the rights to abortion to that went away. And now every state is left to their own devices. And some activists enshrine that into their state constitution, say, our state is protecting that. Fair game. They won. They won the democracy game. And they didn't win it by complaining, but they won it by learning. And maybe there was people that ran those reform campaigns that were so passionate about protecting abortion for good reason that they learned how to be a reform activist. They raised money. They sounded that bell. They knocked on doors. They recruited other volunteers. They had the courage to ask high net worth individuals to make donations to their campaigns. Then they learned how to shoot a commercial, and they ran that commercial on Hulu. And they did all of that because they care. That is what it should look like for you to notice something that you're discontent with and use that as fuel to motivate you to make the world more aligned with how you think it should be. And if we have 300 million Americans who are all operating at that level of like earnest civic stewardship, now the dialogue is getting hotter, but in a good way. The activism is getting sharper and in a good way. And we're talking less about the Kardashians and more about the next vote of our state legislation. That is a good thing.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. That's why I love the independent movement, because it gives me something that I can do. And that's really ultimately at the end of the day, that's what I want, is like, what can we do to move out of the place of, oh my God, what are we going to do? And into, this is what we are going to do, because we know what our boundaries are and we know how to protect those boundaries, and we are sovereign and can feel safe and resilient in ourselves and not victimized by what's out there, but because we are so empowered by what's in here. So
I'll say thank you to the profit interests. Thank you to the hyperpolarization. Thank you to the manipulative media outlets. Thank you to all of that, because it's helping us to awaken. And 250 years ago, the founder of this country, my son is at Hamilton, the musical, right now. And they activated an experiment, right? Like a great experiment of democracy at a very, very large scale. Is it going to work? Can we do governance without monarchy? Can we do governance that like protects people's general rights? These are all questions. Question mark, ... We've learned a lot since then. And if we want to get profound and, you know, a little bit kind of like, I don't know, sacred for a moment, I believe that one of the things that makes America unique on this planet is that we are driving this experiment of democracy. Now, a lot of other countries have picked up, created their own permutations around that, have their own novel, innovative aspects of it that are good and working. So I don't want to take away from that. But I believe that America is going to birth an upgraded expression of governance of, by, and for the people as a part of our sacred service to humanity. And just like we exported Democracy 1.0 that enabled governance of, by, and for the people to spread around the world, now is our moment in time to inventory all the ways that the experiment went off the rails. All the ways that we thought, can we protect this thing from bad actors? No. Okay, how did all the bad actors get into positions of power where they were able to manipulate public institutions for their personal gain? We have the opportunity right now, but when I say right now, I mean over the next 20 years, like it's a journey of a lifetime.
Time is horizontal.
To inventory this, to recognize that it's an opportunity, dare I say, a moral obligation to be a modern patriot. Yeah. And that the opportunity that's on the table here is for us to invent a better expression of our governance systems in our country, practice them, bring them online, and share them around the world. And that if we want a better planet that is stewarded better, and we want less war or no war, and we want a huge focus on ecological regeneration and stewardship, and we want the entire clock of the world to not revolve around profit, then this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
We're going to rebirth a more beautiful expression of governance in this country. We're going to share that around the world. And as you and I have talked about, governance is about making good choices together. So at the end of the day, if we suck at making good choices together, we're going to create a shitty civilization. And if we get better at making wise, mature, responsible, insightful, forward-thinking choices together, and we can make more better choices at a greater reliability, in a more distributed fashion, at larger scales of significance over an extended period of time, the improvement that we want in the world will become emergent from that improvement of the quality of our choice making and the governance that we create for ourselves, our communities, our nation, and the world.
We can look back on this moment and be grateful.
Totally.
That it led us to unite.
What a catalyst.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for creating the infrastructure that is going to support the people that want to do that together over the next 20 years with the United Independent Movement. And I look forward to hearing what's next and being able to invite people in to the next stages of their own leadership so that we can really do this together.
Yeah, our last program was the Independent National Convention, which we just had this last year. And running those national events to juxtapose the Republican and Democrat national conventions has been the first act of our organization. And now we're ready for the next phase, where we haven't gotten into the political landscape yet. And we haven't translated our kind of growing audience and the influence we have into specific political activism. And so what we're doing right now is we're activating something called the United Independent Leadership Forum, which becomes basically a community and a training ground for people who want to become independent activists to do the three things I mentioned: reform, electoral activities, and accountability. And then to bring all that energy together to be able to run a national campaign in 2026 to put a block of independents in Congress and reveal to the country and the world that Republicans and Democrats aren't safe, that the independents are coming and that we're winning elections, and creating a positive feedback loop between more independents winning federal offices and more donor dollars coming behind independents, and more good talent choosing to run as independents, and more incumbents choosing to resign their party affiliations and run as independents. And there's all these pieces coming together. And so if anybody's looking for how to get involved, they can plug into what we're creating with the Leadership Forum, and then everything else will kind of take care of itself. Great. So we'll share some links or something.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks so much, Christopher.
Thank you, Allie.